Good evening and welcome to the Sunday edition of Agenda Newsline's public participation program. Tonight the focus and the discussion is on federalism as a form of state for the new South Africa. The current interim constitution provides for concurrent and overriding powers in intergovernmental relations with a specific area of exclusivity of powers to the provinces, which should form the basis for the final constitution. The question of what it would take to have a federal state in South Africa came to the fore after President Mandela's comment earlier this week. Meron Segal compiled this setup piece.
Many countries have adopted a federal form of government where the regions or constituent parts have control over their own internal affairs. The central government has limited powers, usually resulting in tension as well as checks and balances between the centre and its units. The United States is possibly the best-known example of a federation where each of the 50 states has its own government, constitution and laws. Ever since 1789, when the first 13 independent states came together to form a new country, the states decided which powers to permit the central government, based in Washington, to exercise. The US federal government controls defense, foreign policy, interstate trade, the money supply, and the country's borders. The states themselves delegate certain powers to local authorities, counties, cities, and towns, which have considerable power over the daily lives of ordinary citizens. The New York Police Department, for example, has widespread powers. The New York Harbor Authority controls shipping. States may have different laws about education, agriculture, energy, taxation, even marriage and divorce. A New Yorker wanting a quickie divorce might head down to Nevada. A doctor in Nevada may not be licensed to practice in New York State without taking new examinations. The United States has a population of 250 million spread across a huge continent. Although certain states like California are richer and more populous than states like Alabama or Idaho, the United States is still relatively homogeneous when it comes to individual income and wealth.
The federal system works in the United States because they have a long history of a learning process in which they could teach themselves how to work a federal system. That's the one point I think that's important. And the second one is that the United States does things on a very decentralized level. They try and bring people close to the government, or the government close to the people. Most of what is done in the United States is really done on a local level and on a state level, so to speak, not a federal state level.
Unlike the United States, Germany has a more centralized federal government. The Federal Republic was set up in 1949 after Germany's defeat in the Second World War. Although all its 78 citizens speak the same language, there are still class and regional differences. But the general standard of living is high, and Germany can well afford an organized federal system. In 1990, when the former East Germany was incorporated politically into a unified Germany, the number of Länder, or regions, was increased to 16. Each Länder has its own parliament and makes its own laws. The Länder administer their own school system, as well as police and environmental affairs. They apply federal law with a degree of autonomy. That is, they choose how to follow federal dictates. Länder are broken down into smaller units, or Kreise, which are themselves divided into town and village councils, bringing government closer to the people at all levels. Germany's national government is parliamentary in form. Based in Bonn, the Chancellor is the head of government. As in South Africa, he is usually the pre-selected leader of the party that gains the most votes in a general election.
In certain instances, the Constitution prescribes that the will of the federal government will prevail over the will of the constituent states. And I think Germany also works because it's a well-organized democracy and it's a fairly rich state. Federal governments are expensive exercises.
Switzerland has a highly decentralized federal system. Although it is a small country, its 6 million population is quite diverse. The main ethnic language groups are German, French, Italian, and Rhaeto-Romansh. The main religions, Protestant and Catholic. In 1291, the first Mutual Assistance Pact was formed between 3 cantons or regions. Today, Switzerland has 26 cantons, each of which has its own state council and legislature. The cantons themselves have responsibility for justice, the police, finance, health, social welfare and education, amongst other things. The Federal or National Council has a small cabinet of only 7 members. Each of the 3 political parties holds 2 of these 7 seats, the remaining seat going to the largest minority party.
The magic formula is that the Swiss Federation is very much a decentralized one. Most of what goes on in Switzerland is either done on local government or town or city level, and then on what they call the cantonal level, or what we would call in South Africa the provincial level. The Swiss Federation or federal government has really the functions of protecting the borders of Switzerland and looking after the money supply.
The only African state which has a type of federal system, at least in theory, is Nigeria. With a population of 117 million, Nigeria is the largest economic power in West Africa, depending heavily on petroleum exports, although this is a declining source of revenue. Nigeria's history since 1914, when it was united to form Britain's largest African colony, has been plagued by ethnic and religious differences amounting to hostility, ongoing rivalry and corruption amongst its 4 main regions. The largest tribal groupings are the Igbo in the east and the Yoruba in the west. The north is predominantly Muslim, the south Christian. A federal structure was introduced in 1954, but after independence in 1963, this alliance crumbled. Constitutional crises and coups followed. Finally, the Igbo-dominated East broke loose to form the Republic of Biafra, only to be crushed after a 3-year civil war by the military government which had assumed central power. Since then, Nigeria has been promising to return to civilian rule and true democracy. The construction of a new federal capital at Abuja is still not complete, and federalism seems a long way off.
Nigeria is not a democracy, and to have a federation you need to be democratic in outlook. You need to accept that there can be opposition against the government, and in Nigeria you have a military government, and military governments do not accept opposition. They want to govern from the top down to the bottom, and federations are really a bottoms-up approach.
What lessons are there for South Africa?
What is important, I think, for South Africa is that we should decentralize powers and bring government as close to the people as is possible. But by that, what is possible, I also mean what we can pay for and what we can administer. And we should go slowly. And if in the end we end up with a federal model or a state structure that looks something like the German one or the American one, let us say we learned something from the Americans and we learned something from the Germans, and we put that in our pipe and smoked it and came up with one of our own models.
Joining me in the studio tonight is Professor Herbert Vilakazi from the University of Zululand and Dr. Al Johnson from Canada, working for the South African Project on Governance. We also have political party representatives in our midst to debate on whether South Africa should adopt federalism in its new constitution. Good evening to you, gentlemen, and welcome. Dr. Al Johnson, if I may start with you, what do we have in terms of what we could call a multi-tier government? Is it federalist in approach? What do we have?
Well, I would sooner talk about the elements of what we in Canada would call federalism. Essentially, you start out with the proposition that you need regional government or provincial government. Secondly, if you believe in democracy, then you're going to have a democratically elected regional government, a democratically elected national government. Then you may have to have a division of competencies as between the two, and that's what you put in the Constitution. And then after you have done that, you must make some judgment as to how the national dimensions or aspects of provincial matters will be brought into play, and vice versa, how are the provincial aspects of national matters going to be brought into play. That's what we would call federalism in Canada. I've heard it described in South Africa as multi-tier government. But the elements or the ingredients, I think, are all there.
So we already have, in your view, a measure of federalism.
It depends on who you're talking to. If you're talking to a Canadian, yes.
Okay. Professor Herbert Vilakazi, what would it take to bring about the kind of federalism that is demanded by other parties, as it were, in South Africa?
Well, again, we have to have a very clear idea of what federalism is, really. We're talking here about the division of powers, the state power between the central government on one hand and regional or state, governments, you see. And this is to avoid, what has been known for centuries to be a common problem, which is the abuse of power. As Lord Atton said, power tends to corrupt, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And a way of dealing with this problem has been to apportion some of the power to central and some of the power to regional, areas. In addition to that, there is also the fact that, in modern society, modern industrial society, there is also the specter, the problem of bureaucratization. And bureaucracies somehow inject gross inefficiency in government, and what's more, it's very expensive. As we all know, 2/3 or just about 2/3 or more of all the taxes collected by the modern, say, the South African government actually goes to paying the wages and the benefits of civil servants, so that it is expensive. Big government is expensive. So in that sense, decentralization or self-government, promoting self-government at the local level may actually be cheaper.
But are you not going to create governments, regional governments, that are going to have their own premises we have and their own bureaucracies, as it were? You're not going to be solving any problem. Argue against that. What exactly is your point?
No. One is not, arguing. Again, in the present system, of course, you do have the central government and provincial, governments. Even though there's a big question mark as to whether or not, the provincial governments do have the power. But the local government, situation has not been clarified, at all. We're to have local elections, local government elections in November, but no one is really clear as to what happen November 2, in terms of the actual handling of power at the local level. So in South Africa, the trappings are there, the picture is there for federalism, but I think it's the actual circulation, blood circulation, that is missing at this point.
Let me bring in the ANC's Pravin Gordhan. Your party is said to be arguing very strongly for a centralized approach with weak federal options. Your comment?
Well, the first comment, regrettably, Leslie, has to be that you are off the mark completely about what our constitutional proposals are. I think what we as South Africans are looking for is what kind of governmental system do we create, and at how many levels do we create them, having won a very hard-fought battle for freedom and democracy in our country. And the ANC's position is that we should have governance at 3 levels: national, provincial, and local. Secondly, the issue is, and that's what the federalism debate is about, what powers do you assign to each of these levels of government? And I think we have found our own unique formula, both in the interim constitution, and we will find it once again as we write the new constitution of this country. And our view is that, on the one hand, whatever powers we assign to whichever level of government must ensure that our quest for national unity, our quest for building the rainbow nation, must not be damaged in any kind of way.
Okay, but
at the same time, if I can just finish, Leslie, we are saying that we want legitimate autonomy and powers for each of the levels of government, which means that there will be local government, there will be powers for provincial government, and powers for local national government within this particular context. But I think the other point that is important, which emerges in Professor Venter's introductory comments, is that we are a young nation. We should not actually try to type out our new constitution and its provincial system in granite. We should allow ourselves to evolve a South African brand of constitutionalism, which will have both elements of federalism and what you call unitarism within it.
Governor, does the fact that the president has indicated his intention of sending people to go and study the German model not indicate a move away from your formal position, which was more centrist?
No, that's, I think, a popular myth which regrettably gets repeated and propagated each time the media has an opportunity. The ANC's proposals to the Constitutional Assembly are very clear. They are saying that we want 3 levels of government. We are saying that the provinces must be given significant powers, and perhaps we are even taking it one step further. Not only are we saying the powers that they have and enjoy under Schedule 6 of the present Constitution is something that they should enjoy in the future, but in terms of our proposal, we are saying that the province should be directly represented in the new Senate we are proposing, called the Council of Provinces. They should participate directly in formulating national law, particularly national law that affects the provinces themselves. And that, I think, is very significant power. We are in the process of formulating a proposal as to what kind of leverage will this Council of Provinces or Senate have in respect of the national lawmaking process, particularly when the law affects the province.
Okay, let me bring in Al Johnson here. Taking a bird's eye view of the current situation, are we bringing government closer to the people?
Well, there clearly is provision for provincial government and obviously for local government in South Africa. And when you look at the division of competencies, you see that the matters that affect people most closely, education, primary and secondary education, health, housing, are within the jurisdiction of provinces, within the competency of the provinces.
But is that enough?
Well, I wouldn't want to make a judgment about that because from our point of view as a very highly decentralized nation, if you looked at our division of competencies, you'd find we weren't very different. You can evolve a federation or a multi-tier state evolves a very great deal. And it seems to me clear, therefore, that you should have government close to which is contemplated in the interim constitution of South Africa. You must also be sure, on the other hand, that there is provision for the national aspects of those competencies to be expressed. For example, and this is also in the interim constitution, reference to, for example, minimum standards.
Okay, Maxwell Namatsivanani, the PAC, does it still believe in a centrist situation and provincial governments being more administrative, or have you changed?
The PAC is still committed to a centrist unitary state. We would be opposed to a federal system whereby you find that each province have separate taxation powers which may contradict each other in separate fiscal policies and monetary policies, and a situation whereby you have provinces with separate armies, separate police force. That is a recipe for confusion. We would prefer a strong central government with provincial governments as administrative centers with soft provincial powers rather than a strong pure federal system.
Are you totally opposed to the concept of government close to the people?
We are not opposed to the devolution of powers, and that is why the PAC in Parliament emphasized that we support provincial government and local government. But we feel that the powers of both local government and the provincial government must be contained in the national constitution, and any other powers which is not articulated in the constitution should belong to the central national government.
What powers should be given to the regional governments in your view?
Firstly, we are saying that the national government really should control the fiscal powers and the monetary policies, the defense, the police force and all that. That really the provincial powers should carry administrative tasks to implement national policies and national decisions coming from national parliament. So as to we are building, because we are saying that the current structure where we have racial and ethnic boundaries must be fought through a central government which is strong, which will unite and build a united country rather than a federal system.
Okay, unity in diversity, it's the issue that is coming up very strongly, Professor Herbert Vilakazi. Would the federalist situation address that?
Well, the true federal situation does address that. May I just point out that, one of the big problems I think confronting us is due to one of the causes of the problem is that we have a situation in which there already exists a central government that is deciding whether to give federal or a unitary, framework, you see. Now, that in itself makes it very difficult, compare, for example, to a situation, say, in the United States where the agreement on a federal or unitary state was decided before the formation of government.
But can we change things around, or should we not?
No, what I'm simply saying is that, the very fact that you have an existing central government makes it very difficult for this central government to want to disempower itself, so that, that in itself becomes a very tricky situation.
With respect, I think Professor Vilakazi is off the mark.
Why do you say so?
No, I think we must differentiate between assigning laws, which have existed in the past, and giving powers. The powers that provinces have are entrenched in the Constitution. Any province, once it has come into being and its legislature is actually operational, can in fact pass a law, for example, on abattoirs. It can pass a law on certain aspects of education. Nothing stops it from passing a law. What Professor Vilakazi is talking about is assigning functions in terms of existing legislation, which President Mandela had to do once the new South Africa came into being. And there, of course, one has to apply one's mind as to which function can be best performed at a provincial level and which function best performed at a national level. So I think that crudification is really regrettable.
Let me bring in Professor Vilakazi again.
I really don't agree with that.
Professor Vilakazi first, please.
Well, actually, if we've been following this issue in the press over the last few months, one actually gets the impression that what I'm saying is what the papers have been talking about. I mean, for example, if you look at the latest bill on education, the whole controversy over education, it is, I think, the weight is largely in favor of the central government deciding how much to give and what to withhold. And I'm simply pointing out that that is a technical problem.
Is it interpretation rather than fact?
I'm saying that to me seems to be a fact. That to me seems to be. And if you've been reading, the press and following the events in the last few months, I think the issues of the complaints of premiers has been mentioned, that the premiers are complaining that they are not being given the powers. Who is not giving them the powers?
It's not functions, but powers.
I mean, the powers. The powers. The framework is there, but as I say, it is a problem of actually implementing it, making it work.
Musa Muyeni, IFP, you're close to secessionist policies. That is what is being alleged.
Off the mark.
I know.
Yes. First of all, Leslie, and the nation also is aware that we have always fought for power, and we have always said power to the people. We did not fight apartheid in order to take power from a small white minority and give it to a small governing, call it multiracial minority in Pretoria. We want power to go back to the people through a federal system. And it is also incorrect and a myth to always equate a strong federal system or provincial system with a weak central government system. These two are not mutually exclusive. You can always have a strong central government coexisting with a strong provincial government, meaning that in their areas of competencies, they each enjoy absolute autonomy.
Musa, what powers would you be happy with as IFP? You were given powers in KwaZulu-Natal to draft your own legislation, your own constitution.
We would be happy with all the powers that affect people's lives on a daily basis. And then for the regions, and then keep those powers that relate to foreign affairs, military, and equalization of standards, be it in education, etc., to the national government. But for somebody like, for instance, Kader Asmal to decide on water matters when he has never been in Nkumbu in the Eastern Cape, and I believe that our people in the Eastern Cape are best situated to actually decide matters of water, roads, and things like that. And therefore, we believe that the central government is, unfortunately, holding all the powers, and we would like to devolve downwards. And also in terms of the formulation of the present constitution, the mistake South Africans are making is to structure the present constitution around certain figures, political characters, believing that they will always be in power, forgetting that Madiba will not be in power forever. One particular president will come into power one day, and he might be a dictator and abuse these powers we are giving the state today.
Okay, let me bring in Dr. Al Johnson here. How far are we off the mark from satisfying IFP's demands vis-a-vis powers to the region?
Well, I would hesitate to intervene in South African politics, and I think people want to hear the South Africans speaking about that. I would simply observe that we have gone through and are going through a situation where we have a province which is really straddling, on the one hand, federalism on the one hand, and on the other hand, separation. And clarity, it seems to me, in Canada, what is called for is clarity of intent and purpose, and in clarity in terms of ultimate objective. And so we're having a referendum on that.
Okay, let me bring in Fanas Skuman from the National Party. Let's talk about financial and fiscal relations here. Your party stands for what? Direct taxes?
Thank you, Leslie. I think, first of all, it's important to say that it is clear that there is no definition on federalism, listening to the insert, listening to the professors. So therefore, I think it is very important that we take the common denominator. It says that we must decentralize and bring the government to the people. Therefore, I think we need to take into account two principles with regard to South Africa. First of all, subsidiarity. We say that the lowest level of government, where it's possible to have effective government, we need to bring those functions down to that level of government.
For example, what?
For example, if one looks at the situation at the moment, there are too many gray areas as far as the concurrency, for instance, on education is concerned. So therefore, we must take away the gray areas in the final constitution. We must have a clearer situation where we can have the provinces where they know, first of all, as far as the competences go. Secondly, also you asked the question about the fiscal powers and how the provinces must fund themselves. I think that's also very important, that these provinces must be certain what money will belong to these provinces, so that a central government cannot just decide if they don't like a specific province, they can just cut off the money. And then secondly, the second principle, due to the fact that South Africa has got a diverse situation, I think we need to talk about asymmetry. As we have listened also to the other countries' federal systems, it's not so in South Africa that all the provinces have developed to a situation where they have equal ability to govern themselves on all the competencies. Therefore, I think we need to adopt the principle of asymmetry. It means that if a specific province has got the ability to take a large number of functions and they want it to be in that way, they must be able to do so. And where a province has not developed to the point where they can take all these functions, then it's necessary to allow them to take as many as they want to take at that specific point.
Okay, let me bring in Dr. Herbert, Professor Herbert Vilakazi again. The issue of giving provinces what they want to have, would that not lead to cessation?
Secession? Not necessarily, not necessarily so. I mean, that term is used widely in South Africa, but I don't know of any party, really, of any group of people, really, that seriously talk of, of secession. So I don't think that, there is that danger. I mean, if at all the powers that we associate with the secessionist inclinations, are real, then almost all the states of the United States would have been called secessionists, because they've got, exclusive. I mean, they can raise taxes, they control their own police, and they can maintain law and order within their own boundaries. So, and yet, they are not secessionists at all.
But should they be given, in your view, fiscal and financial powers to legislate in the provinces in South Africa, in your view?
Yes, I think so. Actually, Leslie, let me just make one generalization. To me, no matter from which side you start, whether you start with federalism or unitarism, in the context of today's world where there is a very strong democratic demand, for self-government, you're going to end up, having to cede power to the local communities, so that they themselves govern themselves. And that really is the essence of federalism. Okay. So that, even in America itself, as federalist as it was in structure, there are there's strong criticism, which, of people who say that government power must be brought closer to the people.
Time for commercial break. When we come back, Peter Leon of the DP will talk to us about the DP's position on federalism. Don't go away.
If you like to try fire, skate on thin ice, Revlon creates fire and ice for the most sensual fragrance. Revlon, fire and ice. And for men who like to play with fire, fire and ice for men.
Friends, fellow South Africans, this is a quick and very exciting announcement to tell you that South Africa is to institute a new homelands policy. Can you believe it? Nogal in die nuwe Suid-Afrika. This map will show you that we will connect all the pieces together to form one homeland. Oh, it looks like very cross veins all over South Africa, ne? But there's one thing. You must be an MTN subscriber, ne? Fooi toch? So if you're as well connected as I am, feel free to roam about your brand new homeland. Viva Zambia!
Welcome back. Mr. Peter Leon, the DP is very strong on federalism, and the question I would like to ask is, how then are you going to address the issue of imbalances of the past?
Well, we think that federalism is the only solution in Africa. I've been listening very carefully to what Pravin said and also what Farnes has said. Farnes, for example, didn't answer the question you asked him about fiscal federalism, which is very important, because one of the points made by the insert is the cost of federalism. We understand and accept that federalism is expensive. We think, for the reasons that Musa's alluded to as well, that you have to have federalism as a solution to South Africa, because we come from a multicultural society, one which has a tremendous history of conflict, of tension. We come from different cultural groups, and it is the only way to solve the problems we have in South Africa, because in fact, if you maintain what the ANC are intent on maintaining in this country, which is essentially a centralized state, you're not going to solve the problems of KwaZulu-Natal. You're going to have enormous dissatisfaction in the Western Cape amongst coloured people who feel very strongly about the effects of affirmative action in that province, and you're not going to solve the problems of this country. And the problem is that I don't think that the major governing party in this country really realizes that. That is why we come with this policy.
What about the issue of formulating the new rainbow nation, reconciliation, working together, coming up with an organic nature of a nation?
You can have, the point is that many countries, and the insert has not shown this, many countries which are third world countries like Brazil, India, Malaysia, which is third world going to first world, have these diverse societies. They have imbalances in those societies. Malaysia has been really a startling example of a successful federal country. India is another example. So the fact that federalism, you have indicated, is the first world, in fact, is very extensive in the third world. And I think that and my party believes that the answer to many of South Africa's problems lies in federalism, because what it does is it brings government to the right levels in society. It empowers local government, it empowers provincial government, and it gives a limited role, a coordinating role to the national government. The problem we have in South Africa at the moment, Leslie, is that you have the forms of federalism and not the substance. In other words, what we've done in South Africa is create 9 provinces, 9 premiers, 9 provincial legislatures. The Gauteng legislature sit in is costing 60 million rand a year to run. It's passed 6 acts in its first year. It's sat for 29 days in its first year of existence. I mean, it's essentially a toy telephone of a legislature. This, I mean, the form of provincial government we have in South Africa at the moment, quite frankly, is a joke.
Okay,
and we really do need to, if you're going to have federalism in South Africa, you actually need to practice it. We're not doing that at the moment.
Pravin Gordhan, the ANC is being attacked very strongly there.
No, Leslie, I think that, you see, it's fine to talk about strong federalism and giving content to it because it doesn't really have the responsibility that the ANC has had over decades now, and that is building one united nation. And within that united nation, creating different levels of government which have effective powers to do what they want. If Peter Leon is having a luxurious time in the Gauteng legislature, that's no fault of the ANC. They must get down to work. They must legislate in terms of Schedule 6 and indicate to the Gauteng public that they are, in fact, working on policy issues and bringing about a change in this particular situation.
Maxwell Nematsivanani, thank you.
Yes. The problem we have today is that we are discussing constitutional principles and constitutional process, yet we have an interim constitution which started on the wrong premise. It has smuggled in some elements of federalism. And secondly, there are constitutional principles which cannot be changed. And that is why it is sort of prescribing what will do finally come in the long term. We are saying that when you have a strong central government, it will be given under our circumstances a task to change the old order, the old ugly edifice that is apartheid, and bring a new change. That needs a central government to do that, with provinces being administrative centers to implement that. And that is the basis for change which we need in the short term.
But we already have premiers complaining that they don't have enough powers to carry out the RDP, to implement whatever they want to implement in those regions.
The question of premiers and the question of provinces, what we are saying is that under the current system, we have many already provinces, and they take a lot of budget from the community. We would like to see a situation whereby we have fewer provincial powers, provinces, and at the same time that we have a situation whereby the powers of the provinces are reduced to purely administrating national policy in terms of reconciliation, in terms of national building, in terms of economic outlook, rather than them having executive powers. The executive powers of the central government must supersede those of provinces, and where there is a conflict, we must allow the central government to have the overriding
Professor
positions.
Herbert Vilakazi, you twitching and twisting, you're not happy with what you
Yes, well, there is also another issue very relevant, to this discussion on federalism, which has not actually been brought up. That is the question of of rural areas, primarily of traditional leaders. Traditional leaders, Contra Lesa, for example, has expressed great dissatisfaction about, the current trend, and the other, traditional leaders, KwaZulu as well as areas, also have expressed, great unhappiness about what is going on. Where does this fit as far as, federalism or unitarism is concerned? We have not handled those issues altogether.
Muzamuyene, where does it fit?
First of all, it is a shame that some leaders are trying to use African traditional institutions for political expediency. One would have thought that now that South Africa is governed by Africans mostly, one would have then expected them to promote and empower such traditional and indigenous institutions. Somebody mentioned the RDP, for instance, and the premiers. Let me just share my view with you, Leslie, and the nation. That, for instance, what is the RDP? RDP, for me, is absolutely nothing. It is a concept within which all departments, government departments, should be operating. But as soon as you create a separate RDP department, you're making a big blunder. Because if RDP is addressing the building of clinics, that is a function of the Department of Health. What is the department going to do? You mentioned also roads. There is a department for roads, etc., etc., etc. So what we are expecting here is devolution of power to where it actually belongs, to the people. And if you are advancing from the premise that a state or a government, in fact, is an institution to which society delegates its right to govern itself, then you have to say the first premise, therefore, power lies with the people at grassroots.
Power lying with the people at grassroots. Fanas Skuma.
I think, Mr. Chairman, the problem to an extent is that we have an interim constitution. We have problems at the moment as far as functions and the division between the national and the provincial governments go. So there, we have conflict there. Therefore, it's necessary to, in writing the final constitution, we must make sure that we remove the grey areas where we talk about concurrency. And then secondly, I think we must also ask Pravin Gordhan just to explain a little bit to us. For instance, in some cases, the ANC has got a split personality on this whole issue of having provincial governments. But on the other hand, when it comes to legislation, like for instance this education bill, they want to take all the power to the central. So it is a matter of giving a clearer situation as far as giving these powers to the provinces. It also seems the ANC central government, they don't like the two provinces where they don't govern. Like for instance, they have problems with KwaZulu-Natal, they have problems with the Western Cape government. So therefore it seems they have got a split personality on this whole issue of federalism. Maybe in their heart of hearts, they're still going for a more centralized government than what we understand on a federal dispensation where the provinces will have the real power on those issues and functions that have been devolved to those levels.
Yes, please.
No, I think at least if the ANC is debating this whole question of how do we distribute powers between national and provincial government, it's far in advance of a national party that has 9 different identities. And I think that's the real debate in this country. The National Party, I thought we had brought over to our understanding of the kind of provincial system that we want in South Africa. It's nice to know that we haven't done enough work and we're going to try to persuade them in that direction. But what we are saying, Leslie, and let me re-emphasize this, we are saying that we need effective provincial government, but more importantly, we also need effective local government. We are saying that if we talk about power to the people as Musa Mieni does, he must really take power to local government. Now, one of the explanations that the IFP needs to give to this country is why aren't there any local government elections in KwaZulu-Natal? As far as the ANC's attitude to the two provinces are concerned, the problem is that these provinces can't make up their minds. The first one, KwaZulu-Natal, can't quite decide whether it wants to be part of South Africa or not. And the second one, Hernus Kriel can't work out whether he's involved in leadership stakes with other people within the National Party, and he wants to use the Western Cape as the tool. Really and I think that is what is actually creating tensions.
I must come in. It's absolute, it's absolute, if I may be rude once in my life, it's absolute nonsense. KwaZulu-Natal is part of South Africa and will always remain part of South Africa. No leader in has ever asked to secede. Okay. Nobody. Except for the ANC, which is trying to promote their secessionist ideas when we are calling for more powers. And let me continue to say also that it is amazing to hear the ANC now talking like this with the National Party. They are voting together in the National Parliament when other parties are actually opposing.
Let me bring in Peter Leon quickly, the way forward, please. Summarize it for us.
Well, I think the answer in South Africa actually to move towards a proper federal structure and not the half-baked structure we have at the moment. I just want to make one observation, though. Fanas Schoeman, is very easy for him to criticize the ANC. The fact is it's his party which is supporting the ANC in railroading legislation through Parliament in the past week on the Constitution.
Gentlemen, let me ask you to leave it right there. That's all we had for tonight. Until tomorrow evening, good night.